Hello and welcome. Today, we're diving deep into one of the most crucial structures in your body, the vertebral column. You might know it as your spine or backbone. It's not just a single bone, but a complex, flexible column of bones that supports your head and body, allows for incredible movement, and protects your delicate spinal cord. In this lesson, we'll explore the different regions that make up your vertebral column, the natural curves of your spine, and why they're important, the general structure of a typical vertebra, the building blocks of your spine, how these vertebrae are uniquely shaped in different regions to perform specific jobs, the amazing intervertebral discs that act as cushions, and finally, the ligaments that hold everything together. So whether you're cooking, walking, or just relaxing, get ready to learn all about the amazing architecture of your vertebral column. Section 1. Regions of the vertebral column. Narrator. Let's start by looking at the overall structure. Imagine your vertebral column as a stack of specialized bony rings. Interestingly, when we're developing, we start with about 33 individual vertebrae. But as we grow, some of these fuse together, so an adult typically has 24 individual vertebrae, plus two fused structures, the sacrum and the coccyx. These vertebrae are organized into 5 distinct regions, from top to bottom. It's helpful to remember them in order. 1. Cervical region. This is your neck. Think C for cervical and C for collar, around your neck. There are 7 cervical vertebrae labeled C1 through C7. 2. Thoracic region. This is your upper and mid-back, where your ribs attach. Think T for thoracic and T for torso. There are 12 thoracic vertebrae labeled T1 through T12. That's one for each pair of ribs. 3. Lumbar region. This is your lower back. Think L for lumbar and L for lower. There are 5 lumbar vertebrae labeled L1 through L5. These are the big chunky ones that bear a lot of your body's weight. 4. Sacrum. Below the lumbar region is the sacrum. It's actually formed by the fusion of 5 sacral vertebrae. This fusion usually isn't complete until around age 20. 5. Coccyx. And finally, at the very bottom, is the coccyx or your tailbone. This is formed by the fusion of usually 4 small coccygeal vertebrae. So, to recap the individual vertebrae, 7 cervical, 12 thoracic, and 5 lumbar. That's 24 individual bones, plus the fused sacrum and coccyx. Here's a fun fact. Almost all mammals, from a tiny mouse to a towering giraffe, have 7 cervical vertebrae in their neck. The difference is in the size of those vertebrae, not the number. A giraffe's cervical vertebrae are just incredibly elongated. Section 2. Curvatures of the vertebral column. Narrator. Now, if you look at a spine from the side, you'll notice it's not perfectly straight. It has a series of curves. Why do you think that is? These curves are super important. They increase the strength and flexibility of the spine and act like a spring to absorb shock when we walk, run, or jump. Imagine trying to walk with a perfectly straight, rigid pole for a spine. Ouch! There are 4 main adult curves, and they are classified as either primary or secondary. Primary curves. These are the curves we're born with. They are the thoracic curve in the chest region and the sacrococcygeal curve formed by the sacrum and coccyx. If you picture a baby curled up, these curves are concave anteriorly, meaning they curve inwards towards the front of the body. They are retained from the original fetal curvature. Secondary curves. These develop after birth as we start to hold our head up and learn to walk. They curve in the opposite direction, convex anteriorly, meaning they curve outwards, away from the front of the body. The cervical curve in the neck develops as an infant starts to hold their head upright. The lumbar curve in the lower back develops when a child begins to sit, stand, and walk. This curve is generally deeper in females. So, primary curves are the thoracic and sacrococcygeal, present from birth. Secondary curves are the cervical and lumbar, developing later. These alternating curves give the spine its characteristic S shape from the side. Sometimes these curves can become exaggerated, leading to conditions like kyphosis, an excessive outward curve of the thoracic spine, often called humpback or hunchback. Lordosis, an excessive inward curve of the lumbar spine, sometimes called swayback. Scoliosis, an abnormal lateral or sideways curvature, often accompanied by a twisting of the vertebral column. These abnormal curvatures can be caused by various factors, including developmental issues, poor posture, or disease. Quick recap. The spine has four natural curves, two primary, thoracic and sacrococcygeal, and two secondary, cervical and lumbar, that provide strength, flexibility, and shock absorption. Section 3. General structure of a vertebra narrator. Even though vertebrae in different regions look a bit different, they share a common basic structure. Think of it like different models of cars. They all have wheels, an engine, and a body, but the details vary. A typical vertebra consists of a few main parts. 1. The body. This is the thick, anterior, front part of the vertebra. It's the primary weight-bearing component. As you go down the vertebral column, the bodies of the vertebrae get progressively larger and thicker to support more weight. 2. The vertebral arch. This is a bony arch located posterior, behind, to the body. It forms the sides and back of the vertebral foramen. The arch itself is made of two parts. Pedicles. These are short, stout pillars that project backward from the body to meet the laminae. They form the sides of the vertebral arch. Laminae. These are flat plates of bone that extend from the pedicles and fuse in the midline at the back, completing the vertebral arch. 3. The vertebral foramen. This is the large central opening formed by the body and the vertebral arch. When all the vertebrae are stacked together, these foramina line up to create the vertebral canal, also called the spinal canal, which encloses and protects the spinal cord. 4. Intervertebral foramina. These are not part of a single vertebra, but are openings formed between adjacent vertebrae. When two vertebrae are stacked, the notches in their pedicles line up to create these paired openings on each side. Spinal nerves exit the vertebral column through these intervertebral foramina. Now, projecting from the vertebral arch are 7 processes, which are bony projections. Spinous. Process. 1. This projects posteriorly, backward, from the junction of the laminae. This is the part you can often feel as bumps running down the middle of your back. Transverse processes. 2. These project laterally, sideways from the point where the pedicles and laminae meet. Superior articular processes. 2. These project upward from the vertebral arch. Their flat surfaces, called facets, articulate, form a joint, with the inferior articular processes of the vertebra above. Inferior articular processes. 2. These project downward from the vertebral arch. Their facets articulate with the superior articular processes of the vertebra below. These articular processes are important because they limit the range of motion between vertebrae and help stabilize the column. Quick recap. A typical vertebra has a weight-bearing body, a protective vertebral arch enclosing the vertebral foramen, and 7 processes, 1 spinous, 2 transverse, 2 superior articular, and 2 inferior articular. Section 4. Regional modifications of vertebrae. Sabioi. Narrator. Now that we know the general plan of a vertebrae, let's see how this plan is modified in each region to suit its specific functions. Cervical vertebrae, C1, C7. These are the smallest and lightest vertebrae because they support the least amount of body weight, primarily the head. A distinguishing feature of most cervical vertebrae, C3, C6, is a bifid spinous process, meaning the spinous process is split into 2 small projections at its tip. Another unique feature is the presence of transverse foramina, small openings in each transverse process. These are important because the vertebral arteries, which supply blood to the brain, pass through them. Now, the first 2 cervical vertebrae are highly specialized. C1 is called the atlas. Think of the mythological Atlas who held the world on his shoulders. C1 supports the skull. The atlas is unique because it doesn't have a body or a spinous process. It's essentially a ring of bone with large superior articular facets that articulate with the occipital condyles of the skull. This joint allows you to nod your head yes. C2 is called the axis. It gets its name because it provides an axis for rotation. The most distinctive feature of the axis is the dens, or odontoid process, a tooth-like projection that extends upward from its body. The dens fits into the anterior part of the atlas, and this joint allows you to rotate your head from side to side, as in shaking your head no. Thoracic vertebrae, T1, T12. These are larger than cervical vertebrae. Their spinous processes are typically long, slender, and point downward, overlapping the vertebra below. This limits hyperextension, bending too far backward. The most characteristic feature of thoracic vertebrae is the presence of costal facets. Costal refers to ribs. These are small, smooth areas on the vertebral bodies and transverse processes where the ribs articulate or connect to the spine. So thoracic vertebrae are uniquely adapted for rib attachment. Lumbar vertebrae, L1, L5. These are the largest and thickest vertebrae in the spinal column. Why? Because they have to support the most body weight. Their bodies are massive and kidney-shaped. Their spinous processes are short, thick, broad, and project almost straight backward, like a hatchet. This allows for more extension of the lumbar spine. Their articular processes are large and face more medially, superior, and laterally, inferior, which helps to lock the lumbar vertebrae together and limit rotation, providing stability. Sacrum. As we mentioned, the sacrum is a single, triangular-shaped bone formed by the fusion of 5 sacral vertebrae. This fusion process typically starts after age 20 and is completed by the mid-20s or early 30s. Key features include the median sacral crest, a bumpy ridge down the posterior midline, which is formed by the fused spinous processes. Lateral sacral crests, formed by fused transverse processes. The sacral promontory, which is the anterior, superior edge of the first sacral vertebra. The sacral canal, which is the continuation of the vertebral canal through the sacrum. Anterior, or ventral, and posterior, or dorsal, sacral foramina. These are pairs of openings on both surfaces of the sacrum that allow for the passage of spinal nerves and blood vessels. The superior articular processes of the sacrum articulate with the inferior articular processes of the L5 vertebra. Coccyx, tailbone. The coccyx is formed by the fusion of usually 4, but sometimes 3 or 5, small rudimentary coccygeal vertebrae. It's generally considered non-weight-bearing when standing, but it can bear some weight and provide slight support when you're sitting and leaning back. Quick recap. Vertebrae are modified regionally. Cervical vertebrae are small with transverse foramina. Atlas and axis are highly specialized. Thoracic vertebrae have costal facets for ribs. Lumbar vertebrae are large and robust for weight-bearing. The sacrum is a fusion of 5 vertebrae, and the coccyx is a fusion of small tailbone vertebrae. Section 5. Intervertebral discs and ligaments of the vertebral column. Narrator. Between the bodies of adjacent vertebrae, from C2 down to the sacrum, we find remarkable structures called intervertebral discs. Intervertebral discs. These discs are fibrocartilaginous pads that act as cushions or shock absorbers. They make up about 25% of the total height of your vertebral column. They strongly unite the vertebrae, but also allow for movement between them. Each disc has 2 main parts. Annulus fibrosus. This is the tough, fibrous outer layer. Annulus means ring. It's composed of concentric layers of fibrocartilage, like the rings of an onion, that firmly anchor the disc to the vertebral bodies. Nucleus pulposus. This is the inner, gel-like core. Pulposus refers to its pulpy nature. It has a high water content, which makes it excellent at resisting compression and acting as a shock absorber. Think of it like a jelly-filled donut. As we age, the nucleus pulposus tends to lose water, becoming less effective as a cushion and making the discs thinner. Sometimes, if the annulus fibrosus weakens due to age or injury, the nucleus pulposus can bulge out or even rupture through the annulus. This is called a herniated disc, often referred to as a slipped disc or ruptured disc. If the herniated portion presses on a spinal nerve root, It can cause pain, numbness, or weakness in the area supplied by that nerve. For example, a herniated disc in the lower back, L4, L5, or L5S1, are common sites, can cause sciatica, which is pain radiating down the leg. Common sites for herniation also include C5, C6, or C6, C7 in the neck. Next, let's talk about the ligaments of the vertebral column. Ligaments are strong bands of fibrous connective tissue that connect bones to other bones. The vertebral column is supported and stabilized by a complex system of ligaments. Anterior longitudinal ligament. This strong, broad ligament runs down the anterior, front surfaces of all the vertebral bodies and intervertebral discs. It's very important for resisting excess backward bending, hyperextension, of the spine. This ligament can be injured in whiplash injuries where the head is thrown backward. Posterior longitudinal ligament. This ligament is found inside the vertebral canal, running along the posterior, back surfaces of the vertebral bodies. It's narrower and weaker than the anterior longitudinal ligament and helps to prevent hyperflexion, excessive forward bending, and posterior protrusion of the discs. Supraspinous ligament. This ligament connects the tips of the spinous processes from C7 down to the sacrum. It resists excessive forward bending. In the cervical region, this ligament expands to become the much broader and thicker nuchal ligament. Nucha means nape, or back of the neck. The nuchal ligament attaches to the cervical spinous processes and extends up to the base of the skull, helping to support the head. You can feel it when you tilt your head forward. It's that strong band at the back of your neck. Ligamentum flavum, plural, ligamenta flava. Flavum means yellow. These are paired ligaments that connect the laminae of adjacent vertebrae. They are quite elastic due to a high content of elastic fibers, which gives them a yellowish color. These ligaments help to preserve the normal curvatures of the spine, straighten the vertebral column after flexing, and prevent abrupt flexion. Quick recap. Intervertebral discs, with their annulus fibrosus and nucleus pulposus, provide cushioning and allow movement between vertebrae. Ligaments like the anterior and posterior longitudinal ligaments, supraspinous ligament and nuchal ligament, and ligamenta flava provide crucial support and stability to the entire vertebral column. Conclusion. And that brings us to the end of our journey through the vertebral column. Today, we've learned that the vertebral column, or spine, is a marvel of engineering. It's divided into 5 regions: cervical, thoracic, lumbar, sacral, and coccygeal. We explored its 4 natural curves: thoracic, sacrococcygeal, cervical, and lumbar, which are essential for strength, flexibility, and shock absorption. We looked at the general structure of a vertebra, with its body, arch, and various processes, and saw how these features are modified in each region to suit specific functions, like the rib facets on thoracic vertebrae or the large bodies of lumbar vertebrae. We also discussed the vital intervertebral discs, those shock-absorbing cushions between our vertebrae, composed of the annulus fibrosus and nucleus pulposus. And finally, we touched upon the important ligaments, such as the anterior and posterior longitudinal ligaments, the supraspinous ligament, and the ligamenta flava, which hold our spine together and allow for controlled movement. Your vertebral column does so much for you every day, supporting your body, enabling movement, and protecting your spinal cord. Understanding its structure helps us appreciate its complexity and importance. Thank you for listening. We hope this audio lesson has helped you visualize and understand the incredible architecture of your spine.